Hi, I'm Hannah. I never thought a wedding could make me feel so small. Not because of what I wore or the car I drove, or even the quiet life my husband and I built together. No, it was the way people looked at us, like we didn't belong. We had driven for hours to Napa Valley, my husband at the wheel, our two kids squirming in the back seat. I kept telling myself, it's just a wedding, a celebration, but the closer we got, the heavier my chest felt. When we arrived, the vineyard was everything she had promised in her text messages. Rolling hills, golden sunlight, the kind of flowers you only see in magazines. My cousin, the bride, greeted us with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She barely hugged me before turning to our children and whispering loudly enough for everyone to hear, maybe they'll enjoy the simple food more. Her laugh was sharp, deliberate, and I felt a sting that I couldn't shake. I looked at my husband. He squeezed my hand gently. That small gesture was a lifeline. I whispered back, "We are here for family. We'll get through this." And yet, as we were shown to our table, the one farthest from the celebration, tucked in a corner with a view of the kitchen door, I could hear the quiet snickers. The tablecloths were white, the silver polished to a shine, and there we sat in our modest clothes, our minivan parked with no valet, feeling the weight of every glance. I wanted to shrink into myself. I wanted to tell our kids this wasn't what weddings were supposed to feel like. But I didn't. I smiled, I ate slowly, and in the quiet, I noticed my husband staring at the vineyard in a way that didn't quite match his calm expression. I didn't know then that the world we thought we were stepping into, the world of judgment, laughter, and privilege, was about to shift in a way that none of us expected. That by the end of the night, the very people mocking us would have to face a truth they could never have imagined. Our life back in the Midwest was simple, quiet, and full of small joys. My husband, Daniel, worked as a carpenter. He had rough hands from years of building things, but a gentle heart that always knew the right thing to say. Every morning, I'd watch him sip his coffee in the kitchen, staring out the window at the sunrise. Sometimes I'd catch him daydreaming about projects he wanted to try, or about little things that made him happy, a well-made table, a repaired chair, or a new swing for our kids in the backyard. We lived in a modest home, the kind of house that smelled like fresh paint and baking bread. I taught at the local middle school, and every day I loved the quiet satisfaction of seeing children learn something new. Some days I was patient, some days I was tired, but always I tried to meet every student with kindness. Our life wasn't flashy, but it was full of love, and that was more than enough. Our kids, Emma and Luke, were the heart of our home. Emma was 7, with curly hair that refused to be tamed, and a laugh that could light up a room. Luke was 4, quiet, thoughtful, and endlessly curious about how things worked. They didn't care about labels, clothes, or social status. They cared about ice cream on Sunday afternoons, bedtime stories, and the way Daniel could build a castle out of scrap wood. Watching them reminded me every day that joy didn't have to be expensive or loud. When the invitation arrived, I felt a mix of excitement and unease. It was from my cousin Claire, the cousin I hadn't seen much in recent years. Claire had always been ambitious, always reaching for more. She had married well, her life full of what the magazines call success. Invitations to her parties and events often carried a note of judgment for those who weren't part of her world. But family was family, and so we said yes. Daniel didn't need to be asked twice. "It'll be good for the kids," he said, pulling me into a hug after I worried out loud. "They'll see what life can look like, and we'll show them how to stand proud no matter what." His quiet confidence gave me strength. I packed our car carefully, making sure everything we needed was ready: Emma's favorite blanket, snacks for the drive, and a change of clothes for the kids. The drive to Napa Valley was long, but we made it a small adventure. Daniel and I talked about our life. The kids chattered about what they imagined the wedding would look like. I tried to imagine it too: sprawling gardens, sparkling fountains, tables set with silver and crystal. but somewhere deep inside, I worried that our simple presence might not be welcomed the way we hoped. When we arrived, my heart sank slightly at first glance. Claire's wedding venue was breathtaking. Vineyards stretched as far as the eye could see. The sun glinted off the polished surfaces of the reception hall. Everywhere there was beauty and abundance, the kind of wealth and elegance we had only glimpsed in magazines or online. Guests arrived in sleek cars, dressed in designer outfits that made me suddenly self-conscious of our modest clothes. The first moment of tension came quickly. Claire approached us, all smiles, but her words carried an edge I couldn't ignore. She said, "Oh, you made it. I hope the kids don't mind simple food." Her voice was loud enough for a few nearby guests to hear. A few chuckled quietly. I forced a smile and told myself, "Ignore it. It's just Claire." We were shown to our table, the farthest corner of the hall. The tablecloths were white, gleaming in the light, silverware polished to a shine. Guests seated around us exchanged subtle glances, some nods, some barely concealed smirks. Daniel held my hand under the table, his thumb brushing mine in reassurance. "We're here. That's what matters," he whispered. As I looked around, I saw friends of Claire's talking and laughing, clearly proud of their surroundings and their social standing. They glanced at our simple outfits and our modest manners, as if to silently measure us against some unspoken standard. It stung, but I reminded myself that our worth was not measured by dresses or cars. During the cocktail hour, I watched Emma curiously eye the platters of gourmet food, unsure of what she was allowed to try. Luke clutched Daniel's hand, a little overwhelmed by the crowd and the grandeur. I felt protective, wanting to shield them from the silent judgment around the room. I kept telling myself, just a few hours, just enjoy the day. Daniel, as always, seemed calm. He spoke quietly to me, sharing small observations. "Notice the way the staff moves," he said. "Everything is polished, yes, but it's all surface. The real value is in how people treat each other." I nodded, taking comfort in his perspective. As the ceremony began, I felt a strange mix of awe and sadness. The bride looked radiant, the groom smiling beside her. The vows were heartfelt, but there was an undercurrent I couldn't ignore, a sense of pride and ownership that made me uneasy. It wasn't the joy of love, it was the joy of display, of showing the world what they had. And yet my heart softened when I looked at our children, sitting quietly, eyes wide with wonder. They were here. They were safe, and they were loved. Throughout the reception, the subtle judgments continued. A guest whispered about our car in the parking lot, another smirked at our Target outfits as Claire laughed along. I felt the sting, but I focused on the little moments of happiness. Luke clapping at the flowers, Emma tasting her first bite of fancy cake, Daniel smiling quietly at me across the table. I realized then that life had taught me a quiet strength. You could sit in the shadow of arrogance and still hold your head high. You could face judgment and still find moments of joy. And sometimes the world had a way of balancing itself in ways you could never predict. I didn't know it then, but by the end of this night, the very people who mocked us, who measured us by clothes and cars, would have to face a truth they could never imagine, a truth that would shift everything and reveal that the quiet, simple life we led carried more power than anyone could see. As the reception continued, I began to notice the way people observed us, or rather pretended not to. Guests whispered behind hands, glanced in our direction with faint smirks, and then looked away as if daring us to notice. At first, I tried to ignore it. I focused on our children, on Daniel's quiet presence, on the small joys in the room. But with every passing moment, the whispers grew louder, and the invisible weight pressing down on me became harder to ignore. Claire, radiant in her dress, floated through the room, greeting friends and family. She came to our table again, smiling in a way that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I hope the kids are enjoying themselves." She tilted her head toward Emma and Luke. "They must find all this a bit overwhelming. Maybe the simpler foods would suit them better than the fancy appetizers." She chuckled, loud enough for a few nearby guests to hear. Emma, puzzled, looked up at me. "Mom, why did she say that?" she asked softly.
I forced a smile, crouched down, and whispered, "She just wants you to try a little of everything. Don't worry about it." I wanted to protect them from the sting, but even I felt it. Daniel gave my hand a reassuring squeeze, silently letting me know he felt it too. The caterers brought out more food, dishes I had never seen before: foie gras, truffle oil, tiny hors d'oeuvres so delicate they looked like art. Luke poked at a piece with his fork and frowned. Emma, ever curious, tried to eat politely, but I could see her confusion. The children's expressions became a mirror of my own discomfort, polite smiles hiding uncertainty. At one point, Claire leaned in, lowering her voice slightly but still audible, and said, "You know, this vineyard is mine now. Everything you see here, it's all under my name. It's quite something, isn't it?" Her words carried pride, almost arrogance. I nodded politely, unsure what to say. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks. Of course she'd brag like this, I thought, but why does it feel like a challenge aimed at us? Daniel, who had been quiet most of the evening, subtly glanced at her, then at me. I could see the flicker of something in his eyes, calm, measured, but unreadable. He smiled gently and said nothing, letting the conversation drift away. That quiet restraint was his way of keeping peace, though I could feel the tension building inside him beneath his calm exterior. Meanwhile, the guests continued their performances of refinement. A woman near our table spoke loudly about her new designer handbag. Another laughed at a joke that seemed pointedly directed at us. I tried to remind myself that these people didn't define our worth, but the truth was, the constant scrutiny and subtle mockery gnawed at me. It was one thing to be ignored, it was another to be measured and found lacking in a room full of judgment. The children, thankfully, remained mostly unaware. Emma laughed when a waiter twirled a tray of drinks, and Luke's eyes widened at the sparkling lights around the hall. Their innocence was a shield, a small pocket of calm in the storm. I took solace in that. My heart ached, but seeing them happy gave me a quiet strength.
Claire returned once more, her voice carrying over the music. "Do you know," she said, directing her words at Daniel, "how rare it is to own something like this? Not many people get to say the vineyard is theirs. I've worked so hard for this. Everything I touch turns to, well, you know." Her laughter was sharp, almost rehearsed. Daniel's response was subtle. He didn't raise his voice or show irritation. Instead, he sipped his water, nodded politely, and glanced at the children. "It's a beautiful place," he said quietly. "You've made it shine." I felt a pang of admiration for him. He could have confronted her, made a scene, defended our quiet life with words, but he didn't. His calm presence was both reassuring and mysterious. I wondered, for the first time that night, if he had a plan, something beneath the surface that I couldn't see. As the evening wore on, the subtle attacks continued. The seating arrangement kept us at the edge, far from family we knew and friends we might have had. The wine flowed freely, the laughter continued, and the jokes about those Target outfits or the little minivan in the lot reached my ears more than once. I felt my patience thinning, yet I reminded myself to breathe, to focus on our children, on the small acts of love around me. At one point, Emma tugged at my sleeve. "Mom, why are they laughing at us?" she asked, quietly, her eyes wide and confused. I pulled her close, resting my cheek against hers. "They're just people," I whispered. "Sometimes people forget to be kind. But that doesn't matter, sweetie. What matters is that we know who we are and that we care for each other. That's all that counts." Luke, sitting on Daniel's lap, seemed content, though I could see him absorbing the tension around the room. I realized that children notice more than we give them credit for. They hear the whispers, they see the looks, and they feel the mood of the room. It made me even more determined to shield them with calm and love. As dessert was served, the atmosphere seemed to intensify. Guests whispered about the children again, some shaking their heads, others exchanging amused glances. Claire seemed to take pleasure in these moments, delighting in her perceived superiority. She held her glass high, smiling at her friends, and I felt a quiet anger bubble beneath my surface.
Not the kind that shouts or rages, but the kind that waits, watches, and knows a reckoning is coming. I glanced at Daniel again. There was something in the way he observed the room, a quiet strength that went beyond our modest life. I felt a mix of admiration and curiosity. What was he thinking? Was he simply tolerating this, or did he know something I didn't know? The band played a gentle waltz, and couples moved gracefully across the dance floor. I kept Emma and Luke close, letting them watch, letting them experience the beauty while remaining safe. I tried to remind myself that this night, despite its discomforts, was a lesson, a chance to show our children dignity in the face of judgment. It was during this dance, as I held Emma's hand and Daniel watched Luke carefully, that the tension began to shift, almost imperceptibly. Claire moved past us, her laughter ringing clear, and spoke loudly to a group of friends. "Everything here is mine now. The vineyard, the hall, it's all under my name. Not many people can say that." I felt a chill at the words. There was pride, yes, but there was also a challenge, a declaration meant to measure us, to assert dominance in a room already weighted with judgment. The whispers around us seemed to sharpen, guests nodding, affirming her statement. But Daniel remained calm. He didn't speak, but his eyes flicked toward me, a subtle signal that he had noticed something that perhaps I hadn't. His hand rested lightly on mine under the table, steady and reassuring. It was in that moment I understood the depth of the night's conflict. This wasn't simply about appearances or wealth. It was about power, about perception, about who controlled the narrative in this room. And I realized, with a mix of fear and anticipation, that Daniel might hold a secret that could change everything. The subtle mockery continued, a raised eyebrow here, a whispered comment there, a glance at our children's clothes. But behind Daniel's calm, I sensed a quiet storm forming. The shift was almost invisible, like a tide slowly pulling under the sand, preparing to reveal something unexpected. By the time the wedding cake was cut and the guests cheered, I could feel the tension coiling tighter. Every look, every word, every gesture seemed magnified. The night was far from over, and the unspoken conflict between modesty and pride, simplicity and wealth, had reached a boiling point. I looked at Emma and Luke, their faces lit with curiosity and wonder, and I silently promised them that we would emerge from this night with our dignity intact, no matter what happened. Daniel's hand in mine, warm and steady, was a reminder that strength sometimes comes not from confrontation, but from patience and quiet confidence. And deep down I knew, though I couldn't yet see how, that by the end of this evening, the very people who had mocked us, the very people who thought they held all the power, would face a truth they could never have imagined.
The night had grown late, the lights of the vineyard glowing softly against the darkening sky. Guests were still laughing, glasses clinking, the band playing a gentle tune. I watched Emma and Luke, sleepy now, their little hands wrapped around ours as we guided them through the reception. I was tired, my heart heavy from the subtle attacks, the whispered judgments, and the constant reminder that we didn't belong here. At least, that's how it felt. Daniel was quiet, as always, but I noticed a shift in his demeanor. There was a calm certainty, a subtle firmness in the way he moved that I hadn't seen all night. He didn't speak at first, he simply observed, as though taking in every detail of the hall, the guests, the table arrangements, even the way Claire carried herself. "Everything all right?" I whispered, feeling the tension in my chest. "Just watching," he said softly, his eyes steady. "It's almost time." I didn't know what he meant. Almost time for what? I glanced at the other guests, who were beginning to gather near the dance floor, some laughing at a joke, others watching us with faint curiosity. Claire was radiant, holding court as always, confident that the world was exactly as she wanted it, perfect, under her control, and undeniably hers. That confidence, I realized, was about to meet its first challenge. We waited until a lull in the music, a brief pause when most of the guests were distracted. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone.
My heart skipped a beat, unsure what he intended. He tapped it a few times and then stood, commanding attention without a word. I felt Emma clutch my hand, sensing something important was about to happen. "Excuse me, everyone," Daniel said, his voice calm but firm. The room, used to Claire's loud laughter and commanding tone, fell silent almost immediately. "I'd like to make a quick announcement." Claire's smile faltered slightly, a subtle shift in expression that only someone who had studied her every movement would notice. She raised an eyebrow, curious, maybe even a little annoyed. Daniel continued. "This vineyard," he said, sweeping a hand across the hall, "is a beautiful place, and it's clear how much effort has gone into making it shine for tonight's celebration. But I need to clarify something so that everyone understands." He tapped his phone again, and a document appeared on the screen. Guests leaned forward, murmuring in curiosity. "The vineyard," he said, keeping his voice calm and steady, "is not fully owned by the bride or her family. In fact, it's been my silent investment for several years. I am the majority owner, and the venue contract that allows this wedding here expires tonight." A stunned silence fell over the room. Glasses were forgotten mid-toast. Guests turned toward Claire, who now looked as though she had been struck by a sudden chill. I felt Emma and Luke press closer to us, their eyes wide. Claire's voice, usually so commanding, faltered. What are you saying?" she asked, almost whispering. Daniel smiled gently, not in triumph, but in quiet reassurance. "It means," he continued, "that starting tomorrow, the property will be closed for renovations. All future bookings are canceled. This wedding tonight has been allowed only because of the existing contract, which ends at midnight." The room buzzed with confusion and disbelief. Guests whispered rapidly, some of them standing up, others staring at us in shock. Claire's friends looked around, as if searching for some explanation, some way to reclaim control over a situation they had assumed was entirely theirs. I could see the shift in Claire's posture. Pride, arrogance, and confidence began to crumble. Her perfectly composed smile wavered, her hands twisting slightly in front of her. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. The authority she had wielded all evening evaporated in an instant. Daniel didn't shout, didn't gloat. He simply stood there, calm and composed, letting the truth speak for itself. The guests absorbed the news slowly, the initial shock giving way to whispers and murmurs. A few of them looked embarrassed, realizing they had been mocking us all evening. Others stared at Claire, waiting for her to respond. I stammered Claire, searching for words, her usual confidence gone. "But I thought," Daniel interrupted gently. "It's all right," he said. "I understand how assumptions can be made, but tonight I wanted the truth to be clear. The property belongs to me, and starting tomorrow it will be closed until further notice." For a moment, I felt a strange mixture of awe and relief. The tension that had weighed on me all night seemed to shift, not into anger or revenge, but into justice, quiet, undeniable, and inevitable. Daniel's calm authority contrasted sharply with the arrogance of those who had mocked us, and I felt a deep sense of pride in him, in our family, and in the life we had quietly built. Claire's face went pale. She looked around at the guests, searching for support, but most of them were still processing the revelation. Some whispered quietly, avoiding her gaze. Others stared at us with a new respect, or perhaps just recognition that appearances could be deceiving. A few guests attempted to challenge Daniel. "But how?" one asked, a mix of curiosity and disbelief in their voice. Daniel explained simply, without emotion. "Years ago, I purchased the vineyard as an investment. I remained silent, letting it operate under existing contracts. Tonight, the contract allowing this wedding was the last of its term. That's why it ends tomorrow. The property will be unavailable for any events until renovations are complete." The words sank in slowly. I could see the weight of realization settling on Claire's shoulders. The room, once filled with laughter and judgment, was now quiet, heavy with the unexpected reversal of fortune. I felt Emma's small hand squeeze mine. She looked up at me with wide eyes. "Mom, did Daddy just—" I nodded, holding back a smile. "Yes, sweetie," I whispered. "He did." Luke, sensing the shift in the room, clutched Daniel's leg and looked around in confusion. I smiled gently at him. "Everything's okay, baby. Daddy just made sure the truth is known." Claire's voice finally returned, trembling. "But I didn't know." Daniel's gaze softened. "I understand," he said quietly, "but assumptions were made, and tonight it's clear that appearances don't tell the whole story. Let's remember that life has a way of showing us the truth, often when we least expect it." The words sank in slowly. I could see the weight of realization settling on Claire's shoulders. The room, once filled with laughter and judgment, was now quiet, heavy with the unexpected reversal of fortune. I felt Emma's small hand squeeze mine. She looked up at me with wide eyes. "Mom, did Daddy just—" I nodded, holding back a smile. "Yes, sweetie," I whispered. "He did." Luke, sensing the shift in the room, clutched Daniel's leg and looked around in confusion. I smiled gently at him. "Everything's okay, baby. Daddy just made sure the truth is known." Claire's voice finally returned, trembling. "But I didn't know." Daniel's gaze softened. "I understand," he said quietly, "but assumptions were made, and tonight it's clear that appearances don't tell the whole story. Let's remember that life has a way of showing us the truth, often when we least expect it." The room remained silent for a few moments, the shock gradually giving way to murmurs of conversation. Some guests looked embarrassed for having judged us. Others began quietly congratulating Daniel, whispering words of respect they hadn't felt able to share before. I looked at him, my heart swelling with quiet pride. He had handled everything with patience and calm, without anger or showiness. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Power doesn't always come from wealth, appearance, or status. Sometimes it comes quietly, invisibly, through patience, intelligence, and integrity. Claire finally turned away, her expression a mixture of shame and disbelief. She had lost control, and there was nothing she could do to regain it in that moment. The very people she had relied upon to affirm her superiority now witnessed her vulnerability. Daniel crouched slightly to Emma and Luke's level. "Sometimes," he said softly, "people will judge you by what they see, but the truth, the real truth, is often deeper, hidden. Always remember that." I watched the scene unfold, feeling a wave of relief, justice, and quiet triumph. Our family had endured subtle mockery all evening, yet we emerged with dignity intact, not by shouting or confrontation, but by allowing truth to shine quietly and firmly. As the night drew to a close, guests began to leave, some lingering to offer whispered congratulations to Daniel. I held Emma and Luke close, feeling their warmth, their trust, their innocence. And in that moment, I knew that the lesson of the night would stay with them forever, that life's quiet strength often speaks louder than any display of wealth or status. By the time we left the vineyard, the stars were shining above us, scattered like tiny reminders of perspective and truth. Claire had been humbled, guests had been reminded that judgment can be fleeting, and Daniel had quietly, without fanfare, restored balance in a world that felt unkind and unfair. As we drove back to our modest home, Emma and Luke slept softly in the back seat. I held Daniel's hand, my heart full of gratitude. The tension, the embarrassment, the quiet sting of mockery, it all felt like a distant memory now. The night had ended not with anger, but with clarity and a quiet sense that justice, in its own way, had been served. The days after the wedding were quiet, a stark contrast to the tension-filled evening we had just endured. Back home, the familiar scent of our little house, fresh bread, warm laundry, and soft sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, welcomed us like an embrace. Daniel and I unpacked slowly, letting the events of that night settle into memory. The children ran through the rooms, oblivious to the upheaval that had taken place, their laughter echoing through the house, filling every corner with life. I found myself thinking about Claire, about her pride and the fragile facade she had built. Part of me ached for her. I knew that beneath her arrogance, she was still human, still someone capable of feeling hurt, confusion, and regret. But I also understood that some lessons are harsh and unavoidable. That night was her reckoning, and it was not my place to gloat, only to witness the truth unfold. Daniel was quiet in the evenings, more so than usual, though not distant. He would sit with me on the porch, sipping his coffee, watching the sun dip behind the trees, and I realized he was reflecting not on revenge or triumph, but on the deeper meaning of the events. I wanted to ask him what he felt in the moment of revelation, but somehow words seemed unnecessary. His calm presence had carried us through the storm, and now his quiet strength offered me reassurance that the world was not as fragile as it sometimes seemed. A week passed, and I began receiving messages from some of the guests at the wedding. Most were brief, almost hesitant, congratulating us, acknowledging that they had underestimated our family. I read each message slowly, feeling a mix of surprise and validation. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic apologies, only quiet recognition, and in that I found a subtle, lasting satisfaction.
Emma and Luke, in their innocence, did not fully comprehend the magnitude of what had happened, but I noticed subtle changes in them, small glimmers of understanding. Emma, when she spoke of the wedding, described it with a new perspective, noting how people's words and actions don't always reflect who they truly are. Luke, always observant, began asking questions about fairness, about what it meant to be judged by appearances, and how important it was to act with honesty and patience. I realized then that the true impact of that night was not the embarrassment of others, nor the revelation of hidden ownership, but the lessons it imparted to our children. We had faced judgment, endured it with grace, and shown them that strength is quiet, dignity is deliberate, and truth has a way of revealing itself when the time is right. Daniel and I talked at length about what had occurred, not in anger, not in triumph, but in reflection. "It's strange," he said one evening as we watched the sunset from our porch. "We never sought recognition, we never tried to show off, and yet in their eyes that made us invisible, and yet by the end it was enough." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "It's a reminder," I said softly, "that the world isn't always fair, but fairness isn't always what matters. What matters is how we choose to live, and how we teach our children to carry themselves through life." The vineyard itself had changed hands quietly after renovations began. Claire had retreated, her pride bruised, but her life would continue as it always does. She reached out in a brief message of acknowledgement, awkward and tentative. I responded politely, with warmth but without engagement. The events of that night had been a lesson, not a battlefield. There was no need for confrontation beyond what had naturally unfolded. At school, I returned to my familiar routine, greeting students, grading papers, and quietly observing the world around me. Yet, even in the calm, I noticed the subtle shifts in myself. I walked a little taller, smiled a little wider, and felt a quiet assurance that came not from victory, but from understanding. Understanding that patience, empathy, and integrity hold more power than any display of wealth or status. I shared small parts of the story with close friends and family, careful to preserve the dignity of all involved. There was laughter, yes, at the irony of it all, but also a profound recognition that life has a way of balancing itself, often in ways that are unexpected, quiet, and deeply meaningful. Emma began asking questions that reflected her growing awareness of the world. "Mom," she said one afternoon, "why did people laugh at us at the wedding?" I took her hand, sitting beside her on the couch. "Some people," I said slowly, choosing my words with care, "judge others by what they see on the outside. They forget to look at the heart. But you and Luke and Daniel and I, we know what matters. We know who we are, and that's enough." Luke, listening from across the room, nodded solemnly. "So it's like people can be wrong about you, but that doesn't change who you are?" "Yes, baby," I said softly, "exactly that." In the following weeks, life settled into a gentle rhythm. The memory of the wedding became less about embarrassment and more about reflection. I thought often about Claire, hoping that she too might learn from the night, that pride, when untempered by empathy and humility, can be fragile.
And I thought about the guests, some of whom quietly expressed respect and admiration for Daniel and our family in the weeks after. I realized that what mattered most was the impact on our children. They had seen strength without aggression, patience without bitterness, and dignity without display. They had witnessed the quiet power of truth revealed in its own time, and in that I found a profound sense of peace. Daniel and I often discussed the deeper meaning of that night. People assume they know everything about the world, but life has a way of humbling us, gently or harshly. What we experienced wasn't revenge, and it wasn't triumph. It was balance. I nodded, feeling the weight and truth of his words. Balance, I repeated softly, and perhaps teaching our children that balance is worth more than applause or recognition. The days grew warmer, spring approaching in gentle waves of sunlight and blooming flowers. Our family spent time in the backyard, building small projects with Daniel, reading stories with Luke and Emma, and savoring the quiet moments that defined our lives. The wedding, once a source of tension and discomfort, became a story of resilience, reflection, and subtle justice, a story we would carry in our hearts, quietly and meaningfully for years to come. I thought often about the power of humility and patience. The ability to endure judgment, to maintain dignity, and to act with integrity is a lesson too rarely taught in a world obsessed with appearances and status. That night had been a vivid demonstration of those truths, and I felt grateful for the calm strength that had guided us through it all. When I tucked Emma and Luke into bed, I felt their warmth, their trust, and their innocence. I knew that they had learned something profound, that life isn't about how others judge you, but how you carry yourself, how you treat others, and how you respond to challenges. Daniel sat beside me, holding my hand. We didn't speak much, but we didn't need to. The silence was comfortable, filled with shared understanding and quiet pride. We had faced judgment, endured mockery, and emerged with our dignity intact. And that, I realized, was a rare and precious victory. Life returned to its gentle rhythm, the world outside continuing in its chaotic, bustling way, yet inside our home there was calm, warmth, and a profound sense of purpose. The wedding, the judgment, the revelations, they all became part of our story, quietly shaping who we were and who our children would become. And in that quiet, reflective peace, I understood something I hadn't fully realized before. The true measure of life isn't in wealth, appearances, or social standing. It's in kindness, patience, integrity, and the quiet strength to face challenges with calm and grace. That is the legacy we will carry, the lessons we will pass on, and the foundation on which our family stands, unshaken, undeterred, and quietly powerful. Weeks had passed since the wedding, and life had settled back into its familiar rhythm. The vineyard, once a symbol of judgment and superiority, had faded into memory, replaced by the quiet joys of our home. The air smelled of fresh bread, the children's laughter echoed through the rooms, and sunlight streamed gently through the windows. It was ordinary, simple, and yet deeply comforting, a reminder of what truly mattered. I often thought about Claire. Pride can be fragile, and that night had shown how quickly it could crumble. I felt no anger toward her, only a quiet hope that she might learn from the experience, that humility might temper her ambition, and that empathy could grow where judgment had once flourished. Life, I realized, has its way of teaching lessons, sometimes gently, sometimes in ways that leave a lasting impression. Emma and Luke were growing in their own ways, absorbing the world around them. I noticed subtle changes in their outlook, a deeper understanding of fairness, of patience, and of quiet strength. They no longer asked why people laughed or judged others. Instead, they began to ask thoughtful questions. "Mom, why is it important to stay calm when someone is unkind?" Or, "Dad, can we always wait for the truth before we decide what's right?" I answered them as best I could,
knowing that the lesson they carried would stay with them longer than any words I could give them. "Sometimes," I said gently, "the world will judge you no matter what you do, but the way you respond, with patience, dignity, and honesty, is what truly matters. The truth has a way of revealing itself, and when it does, it is more powerful than anger or revenge." Daniel remained the quiet center of our family, his steady presence a constant reminder of strength and integrity. We spent our days together in simple routines, building small projects, reading stories, laughing at little mishaps, and savoring the calm moments. The events of the wedding felt like a distant echo, a reminder that life can shift in an instant, that appearances can deceive, and that patience often carries more power than pride. I reflected often on the lessons of that night, not in bitterness but in gratitude. We had faced judgment, endured subtle mockery, and yet emerged with dignity intact. The children had witnessed this quietly, learning that true strength is measured not by wealth, status, or appearances, but the way we carry ourselves, treat others, and respond to challenges. Sometimes I catch myself smiling when I think about the look on Claire's face when the truth was revealed, but it is not a smile of triumph or revenge. It is a smile of understanding, an acknowledgement that life unfolds in unexpected ways, that every action has its consequences, and that quiet integrity often speaks louder than arrogance. Our home, our family, and the life we lead may seem ordinary to the outside world, but within its walls there is warmth, trust, and love. We have learned that it is these simple, honest things, shared moments, gentle guidance, and the quiet strength to face difficulties that create lasting value. As I tuck Emma and Luke into bed each night, I see their eyes close peacefully, their little hands resting safely in mine. I whisper softly, "The world may not always understand you, but never forget who you are. Always act with kindness, patience, and courage, and the truth will guide you." And in that quiet, reflective peace, I understand the final lesson the wedding offered us, that life is measured not by what others see, but how we live, how we love, and how we carry ourselves through every moment, whether simple or grand. That is the true legacy, the enduring power, and the quiet victory of a life lived with integrity. Even in a world full of judgment, laughter at your expense, or misplaced pride, there is room for dignity, for patience, and for the quiet joy of knowing that truth, patient, unwavering, and undeniable, will always find its way. And in our little home, with the soft glow of evening light, the warmth of family, and the laughter of children, I feel a calm certainty. We are exactly where we are meant to be.